It's My Nerd World, and welcome to it, a Star Wars show. This week, Diego Luna talks with a Hollywood Reporter about the upcoming Andor Disney Plus series. Damon Lindelof has been regularly spotted on the Disney lot. That's reigniting speculation about his reported Star Wars project. If you're not familiar with who he is, I will familiarize you. Plus, and most importantly, Rian Johnson is even more proud of Star Wars The Last Jedi 5 years on and is not finished playing in the Star Wars universe, and that is a good thing. All right, let's go ahead and get right to it. Thank you so much for checking out My Nerd World, a Star Wars show this week.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you. Just let it in.
Welcome to My Nerd World, the Star Wars show, and I am your host, Jon Justice. And again, thank you so much for checking out this week's episode. You can always email me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Remember to head on over to mynerdworld.net, where you can find out more about the podcast and, of course, my science fiction space opera book series, EMBARK. If you're not familiar with it, I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the show, as I do every single week. A lot of conversations around Star Wars this week, and we have a lot of ground to cover. The big one, and we'll leave that to the end of the news this week, as Rian Johnson isn't finished with Star Wars yet. But of course, you talk Rian Johnson, you talk The Last Jedi, and suddenly now you're talking controversy within Star Wars. I've started to rewatch the prequel trilogy again. I watched The Force Awakens just a few days ago. I'm planning on watching The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker here soon. Watching The Force Awakens, though, I was reminded of the reason, and this is just for me personally, I was reminded of the reason why I don't really get lost that much in the controversy and why I probably loved The Last Jedi as much as I do, and The Rise of Skywalker. I prefer both of those films over The Force Awakens, although The Force Awakens, in my opinion, does a fantastic job of setting up the prequel trilogy. But when I go and I watch these films, I just have such a love for the universe that George Lucas has created and what everybody that has come after him has created. And almost every aspect of what ends up on the screen is just on some level cool because it takes place within the Star Wars universe. And I've tried to lend myself to watching a show like Obi-Wan Kenobi, which has probably been my most disappointing for me. I was the most disappointed out of everything in the Disney era that's been released so far with the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. I do have some thoughts on that coming up a little bit later on. But even going and watching the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, I can still sit down and enjoy it despite the criticisms that I have of it because it is Star Wars. And it's just cool. Now, that cannot be said for the holiday special. I will say that much. There are lines that need to be drawn. I was talking with my wife just recently because a friend of the show and a friend of mine, we call him lawyer extraordinaire Jeff O'Brien. He a friend of the show, my radio show that I do Monday through Friday here on Twin Cities News Talk in Minneapolis. He, for my birthday, was able to get me a DVD copy of the Star Wars Holiday Special, and I had a VHS copy. I still have the VHS copy somewhere, but I did not have it on digital. Somebody had transferred a decent transfer of the Holiday Special. Any self-respecting Star Wars collector, in my opinion, needs to have the Holiday Special in their collection just to say that you have it. That being said, it's not good. Now, some stuff still came out of it that are good, right? There is a level where you can mute it if you will, and just watch it for the sake of watching Star Wars. But, the biggest problem with the holiday special is, George Lucas didn't really have his hands in it as much as he should have. And the best thing that came out of that was the cartoon featuring Boba Fett. So that would be the one exception to Star Wars content and being able to enjoy it just because it's Star Wars, especially the theatrical releases and the live action shows. So we'll get into more of Rian Johnson. I love The Last Jedi, not just because it's Star Wars, but because I think that it's an absolute masterpiece. I felt that way since the first time I saw it. It's challenging. I love the story that it tells, and I'm just a big prequel trilogy fan. I love what was done with that. So we'll get into that here in just a bit. Let's start off with an interview that Diego Luna, who plays Cassian Andor, had recently with The Hollywood Reporter.
So which is it? I know Bix has a game. I know you bribe quartermasters to leave valuables on the ships before they come in for scrap, but this isn't that. This isn't something that let pass.
No. I went in and got this myself.
How? How's that possible? It was sealed on the Imperial Naval Base in Steergard.
Look, you got the money, I got the box. What else is there to talk about?
I'll give you another 1,000 credits to tell me how you got it.
Another 1,000.
Done.
This show is going to be so fantastic. Diego Luna is well aware that how Cassian Andor's story ends, but he's certain that Andor, Disney Plus, and its upcoming Star Wars series is going to change the way you look at the character in 2016's Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. The prequel series begins 5 years before the events of Rogue One, as Cassian is looking for someone from his past, but he instead finds some trouble that quickly escalates. According to Luna, the younger Cassian's journey on Andor will recontextualize the future rebel hero's role in Rogue One. Luna tells The Hollywood Reporter, "In fact, we're going to challenge every idea you have or every answer you came up with for why or how things happened and why this character did what he did. Everyone who watched Rogue One thinks they have the answer. So we're going to challenge that, and we're going to come to you and say, no, listen, things were not the way that you imagined. They were this way. This had to happen for some reason to become the person you know." Now, the series creator and showrunner, Tony Gilroy, co-wrote Rogue One, has already mapped out Andor Season 2, which will shoot in 12 episodes in three episode blocks. Each block will represent a year of story. So naturally, Luna is excited about the ambitious format. "I think it's perfect," he said. "It's lovely. It's almost like 4 different movies via 4 3-episode blocks," Luna says. "There's also space in between each block where time passes, so we're allowed to evolve and transform." And I'm curious to know whether or not we'll end up seeing, within the time jumps, potential future stories outside of Andor with the side character and events that are taking place. I find it very fascinating that Andor is going to cover such a long period of time. Now, that's not to say you can't overlap stories. We've seen that before. I wonder if the plan here by Disney is, we're going to tell this really long Andor story. We're going to see how this plays out. There's going to be new characters within the story. There'll be enough time jumps to where we can actually intersperse and fill in gaps with other potential content down the line because it's going to be on such a large timeline. Now, Diego Luna was asked, did it feel strange because you had played his death years earlier? And Diego Luna responded with, "Probably. I let the guy go. I'm warned. I even had ceremonies to talk about him." He laughs. "And then there I was, being Cassian again, but I was also coming out of the worst time of confinement during the pandemic. So it wasn't just the weirdness of going back to play a guy whose death I already played, but it was also because I was coming out of many months of being the most stationary I've been since I was a baby. So social interaction was gone in our lives, and suddenly I was going back to the set. So it took time." Now, Tony Gilroy said in the past that his superpower is not being a lifelong Star Wars fan. And that's allowed him to make bold choices on Rogue One. And I feel that lack of fear on Andor as well. What I'm interested to see, and I think based off of what we've seen so far, the audio that we've, the clips that we've seen of the show, I've got a lot of confidence this is going to be a hit for Disney Plus, and that I'm going to enjoy it. And I'll get into a few more facets of that a little bit later on. I think that Tony Gilroy worked in coming in to take over Rogue One simply because, while he wasn't a Star Wars fan, that movie had already been constructed for the most part. And he came in to go and clean up and do reshoots. If Tony Gilroy had been in charge of Star Wars Rogue One from the get-go, I question whether or not it would have felt as much as a Star Wars movie as Rogue One ended up feeling. I think we owe a lot of credit to Gareth Edwards to setting the stage on that, shooting what he did and constructing the movie that he did before Tony Gilroy came in, reconstructed things, and did the reshoots. But because the structure was already there was already a film that was created, Tony Gilroy didn't have to worry about not getting the Star Wars aesthetic and mythology right, because it was already laid out. He just needed to go and move things around and change a few plot points. And I imagine in that process, he also learned a lot about Star Wars. And this is where the story group comes into play and is really, really important. And I always have had faith in the story group. I'm more a fan of having a single individual at the top driving all the direction. And I feel like that's something that Disney doesn't really have right now, apart from Kathleen Kennedy. I always thought that Rian Johnson could fill that role spectacularly. A lot of people believe that maybe Jon Favreau or Dave Filoni could be that guy. And I think at some point in time, you're going to see Dave Filoni rise all the way up to a George Lucas level status inside of Disney. It just hasn't happened yet. But I think Tony Gilroy really benefited on Rogue One simply because of the fact that movie was almost pretty much finished. Now, getting back to the article, he says, Tony Gilroy is just not afraid, period. And this goes back to the initial quote that I shared at the start of this article. We're going to challenge every idea you had, every answer you came up with for why things happened to this character and what he did. Why was he willing to sacrifice everything for the cause? What did it mean when he said, I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old? What did he mean when he said, I've done terrible things on behalf of the rebellion? We're going to find out the answers to that in the series. With Rogue One, we were asked to be different. We were a standalone. We were a different Star Wars story that had a beginning and an end. And now we have a Star Wars series that is a standalone again with a beginning and an end. It's meant to be different. It's meant to be its own thing. What do you think of Tony's plan for Season 2, as every 3 episodes will represent a year's worth of story? Diego Luna responded and said, I think that's perfect. It's lovely. It's almost like 4 different movies via 4 3-episode blocks. 3 episodes will be a very strong block to explore a year, another year, and then another year and another year. There is also space in between each block where time passes, as we talked about, so we're allowed to evolve and transform. But I think that's part of Season 1, too. How many episodes have you seen? And Diego Luna said he's only seen 4 at this point in time. He says, so when you saw episode 3, you probably went, I think I know the characters, the tone, and what the series is going to be about. But then we take you where episode 4 goes. And we're like, what? Where are we going? What's going on? What's happened? So I think that's something that this long format gives us. It's the flexibility to literally transform and go somewhere else and meet other characters and find other planets to discover new things. It's a fantastic format, and it's very ambitious. It's complete freedom. You have room, you have space, you have time, and that is lovely when you have something to say. So, in case you didn't know, the first 3 episodes of Andor will premiere on September 21st on Disney+, which really screws up my watching, because typically when a new live-action show drops on a, first thing in the morning or at midnight, I get up early to watch it before I go to work. Unfortunately, with their dropping of 3 episodes that are going to run about 40 to 45 minutes apiece, I'm not going to be able to do that. So those are just Jon Justice problems. I don't expect you to sympathize, so don't worry about it. A lot of people, a lot of articles have said how Andor is adult Star Wars, right? I've heard a lot of commentary around this just based off of what we've seen. This Andor is going to be more adult Star Wars. And I've heard George Lucas obviously say many times, and I've quoted it on the show about how Star Wars is for children, right? 11 to 14-year-olds or whatever. But, honestly, for me, the first Star Wars movie, A New Hope, isn't a kid's movie. And neither is The Empire Strikes Back, in my opinion. Kids can watch them. Kids can relate to them. There's nothing in it that would turn a kid off, in my opinion. But, there's a lot of adult themes in those first 2 films. Well, in all 3 films, really, but I would say they're more kid-friendly than anything else. Return of the Jedi, in my opinion, is probably the most kid-friendly. It has the most kid-friendly elements and moments. Now, Rogue One, to me, is just as much a kid's movie, doing that thing with my fingers, as A New Hope. What I really think that Andor's going to do, to be honest, is I think it's going to make the Obi-Wan Kenobi series perhaps seem more in line with being a kid's series by comparison. It's certainly already, based off of the trailers, in my opinion, has, it's really shown for me what appears to be just a low budget on the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, which, as you've heard if you've listened to previous shows, that was my biggest complaint about Obi-Wan Kenobi, was that as I said, I still enjoy it. In Star Wars, it's fun, but boy, some of the production decisions on that show really have me scratching my head. So all of this is to say that I expect Andor is going to be as well received as Mando, because it's going to feel very much like Star Wars. Kid-friendly, but still adult. And there are elements of the Book of Boba Fett, especially those last couple of episodes, that are really kid-friendly, in my opinion. That's Robert Rodriguez's style, though, being the guy that did Spy Kids. So it's really fascinating to me, the production angle of all of this. And I think that Andor is really going to, if you had complaints about the production of, and I certainly did at the end of the Book of Boba Fett, some of the way those action sequences were shot. And sort of the thinness of that final battle in the Book of Boba Fett. I really think that a show like Andor is going to highlight those, even more. But I'm nitpicking, right? I still watch them. Despite it's still Star Wars at the end of the day, going back to my original point. All right, let's move on to another item, and that is David Lindelof, regularly spotted on the Disney lot, and this is reigniting speculation about his reported Star Wars project.
When I found you, I saw raw, untamed power. And beyond that, something truly special.
Now, back in March of this year, and this is from Star Wars Newsnet, it was reported that writer Damon Lindelof, whose credits include Lost, Prometheus, The Leftovers, Watchmen 2019, Star Trek as well. He was involved in the Star Trek reboots with J.J. Abrams, was potentially working on an unannounced Star Wars movie with Lucasfilm. And Lindelof has been directly tied with J.J. Abrams for years. I mean, that goes back to Star Trek, and it goes back to Lost as well. More recently, a possible update to that rumor has surfaced, indicating that he has been working with Disney and possibly Lucasfilm since then. Trusted film reporter Jeff Snyder revisited his report about Damon Lindelof taking a trip to the galaxy far, far away as a scoop on his website, The Ankler. And he originally posted something very similar, hearing that Damon Lindelof, Watchmen, co-creator of Lost, Leftovers, is working on a new Star Wars movie. Now, 5.5 months later, Snyder offered an update explaining that Damon Lindelof has been eating lunch on the Disney lot, despite his commitment to Miss Davis, a drama series for NBC's Universal's streaming service Peacock. He went on to say, "Remember that Damon Lindelof Star Wars scoop I broke in March? Well, David Lindelof has been spotted dining on the Disney lot quite a bit lately, and I doubt he's working on his Peacock series up there. When will the trades confirmed? Stay tuned." Now, there's no filming schedule for the show Miss Davis that has been revealed at this point, although the project is currently in the casting phase. This likely means, according to Star Wars Newsnet, that the Star Wars film scripted by Damon Lindelof will not arrive until several years from now, should it proceed. Or Lindelof is just pending a script and he's going to hand it off to somebody else and then go working on Miss Davis. That's kind of the way that I read it. You know, you're writing a script, you may be needed for script rewrites, but once it's written, it's written. You can go off and do other things. Now, at the moment, of course, the future is unclear for Star Wars films. Fans have expected Lucasfilm to reveal news about their live-action productions at D23 in the middle of next month. We have Star Wars Disney Day. I'm sorry, not Star Wars Disney Day. We have Disney Plus Day coming up. I'm obviously not expecting any movie announcements or really anything of significance as it relates to Star Wars apart from the behind-the-scenes making of, or whatever they're calling it, for the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. Although there's no word that they will be presenting any updates to their film slate at D23, and I'll comment more on that in a moment. The film project indicated to be the furthest into development has been Taika Waititi's Star Wars project that he is set to direct and co-write with Christy Wilson Cairns, who wrote 1917. Just watched that again recently as well. Fantastic movie. As the movie is expected to begin filming early next year. Marvel Studios' Kevin Feige is set to produce a Star Wars spin-off written by Michael Waldron, who he previously worked with on Loki, Doctor Strange, and the Multiverse of Madness. And given that Marvel and Lucasfilm are set to share a stage for a panel at D23, it is possible that an update on that film will be included as part of that presentation. Now, other proposed films have run into snags. Rogue Squadron was originally set for a 2023 release, but the project is not likely to make that release date as development seems to have stalled. Director Patty Jenkins appears to be focused on writing and directing a third Wonder Woman movie. Now, they talk a little bit about Rian Johnson's trilogy. I'm going to hold off on that commentary because that's the last bit of news that I have today. A movie from director J.D. Dillard and writer Matt Owens has been missing in action for a while, and the all-but-canceled trilogy that was set to be written by Game of Thrones showrunners David Benioff and D.B. Wise, who left Lucasfilm to pursue a deal at Netflix. So, the movie from Damon Lindelof, they write, will either join the list of stalled productions with the typical unforeseen complications that seem to come with Star Wars movies, or the writer of Lost might ironically become someone who helps chart a path for the future of Star Wars on the big screen. Now, as it stands right now, various untitled Star Wars movies are dated for release next year, December 22nd, 2023, December 19th, 2025, and December 17th of 2027. Expect to see a lot more Star Wars television projects in the interim while Indiana Jones 5 represents Lucasfilm's cinematic aspirations for 2023. And there's a lot of talk that date for December next year, December 22nd, 2023, will likely be delayed and filled in with another Star Wars movie. With the box office rebounding the way that it has been this year, whether it's Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, Jurassic World Dominion, The Batman, and certainly Top Gun Maverick, right? Disney, in my opinion, is not going to let too many more years pass before putting Star Wars back on the big screen. What I wonder is whether or not they have these slates of films with all these different individuals that are supposed to be working on them. I am convinced that, or I believe, I'll put it that way, I believe that within Disney and Lucasfilm, they're probably way farther down the line planning the future than we all know, right? And I think a lot of these productions, the ones that will be coming up first, are probably further into pre-production than we even realize, too. I wonder if Disney is looking at perhaps taking an approach in the same vein that the Marvel Cinematic Universe did when it started the MCU. You got to go all the way back, 10 plus years now, to that first Iron Man movie. That first Iron Man movie was the first foray into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was a one-off film, standalone film by itself. Has the post-credit sequence at the end, right, to set things up later. But I wonder if Disney and Lucasfilm are looking at doing something potentially the same. We've been hearing a lot ever since The Rise of Skywalker came out, Bob Iger said there was going to be a delay in the theatrical releases. Again, I think that model is going to change soon because the box office is rebounding, and that's where the money is still to be made, in the box office. But I wonder if these films are spin-off films because Kathleen Kennedy, the story group, the powers that be, are planning on doing something similar to what the MCU did in sort of a reset of the release schedule of Star Wars, starting with one-off films that could eventually build to something else. What I also find curious is that a couple years back when they had the big, I think it was Disney Plus Day again, but they had the big Disney event where they talked about all the upcoming shows and films, and they had the big Star Wars presentation. And I don't think it was specifically for Disney Plus. I think it was just for Disney in general. Anyway, Kathleen Kennedy came out and laid out the future of the Star Wars series, and some shows have fallen by the wayside. Rangers of the New Republic. Other ones are in production, like The Acolyte. We still haven't heard about the Lando show yet. Okay. She also talked about how these live-action shows were all supposed to sort of culminate in something big later on. So you have the cross connection between the Book of Boba Fett and the Mandalorian, and you're also going to get that with the Ahsoka series right next year. Skeleton Crew is set to take place somewhere near around that same time frame of post Return of the Jedi. I wonder if they aren't looking at doing a big major theatrical release with all of those characters, and maybe one of these projects happens to be it. I mean, that really is kind of the version of the MCU that I'm talking about, but I'm wondering if they're going to try to go and duplicate that on the big screen. And I think that's what Kathleen Kennedy was alluding to, is that this culmination event, whether it's on Disney Plus or whether it's, in movie theaters, I imagine it'll be on Disney Plus if it's going to be featuring all of the Disney Plus shows that have been cross-connecting with each other. But that would really be sort of the Avengers culmination film, much like what the MCU did in the one-off stories leading up to the one big story where everybody comes together. So time will tell on all of this. As I've said so many times, I just want to see my Star Wars back on the big screen. Speaking of Star Wars on the big screen, Rian Johnson isn't done.
This is not going to go the way you think.
Now, we'll certainly have more to say about this as we get as I get the Empire magazine in my hands. This was just a couple of teaser articles for the edition that came out this week. Okay. The issue that came out this week. There's a line of dialogue in Star Wars The Last Jedi that feels particularly apt. It's one spoken by Luke Skywalker, writes Empire magazine. And it's the audio clip I just played. This is not going to go the way you think. I didn't even plan that. Writer-director Rian Johnson's middle chapter of the sequel trilogy was rich, adventurous, a mythical tale, continuing the stories of Rey, Kylo Ren, Finn, and Poe Dameron that also dug deep into the soul of Luke Skywalker himself. Decades after the triumphant finale of The Return of the Jedi, along the way, it contained all kinds of surprises, developing the threads of The Force Awakens in fresh and unexpected ways. It was another box office smash. It pulled in over $1.3 billion worldwide, but it also challenged its audience in many ways that some weren't quite prepared for at the time. Now, Empire Magazine is a British magazine, and it cracks me up because it just seems like the British do not have the hang-ups that we Americans have. And this goes back to commentary around The Force Awakens, where I had people that were reaching out to me over the ridiculous assertions that John Boyega shouldn't be playing a stormtrooper, for crying out loud, which are just dumb. And they were talking about the racial issues, and John Boyega had brought up racial issues. And I had people reaching out to me who listen in Europe and were like, we don't have these hang-ups when it comes to this racial stuff over here. Yeah, that's just us, sadly. All right. In a major new Empire interview, Rian Johnson looks back at The Last Jedi for its 5th anniversary, reflecting with a few years' distance on his episode in the Skywalker saga. I'm even more proud of it 5 years on, he says. When I was up at bat, I really swung at the ball. The film, he says, is not just a Star Wars movie. It's a movie about Star Wars and what it means to fans, himself included. I think it's impossible for any of us to approach Star Wars without thinking about it as a myth that we were raised with, and how that myth, that story, baked itself into us and affected us, Johnson explains. The ultimate intent was not to strip away. The intent was to get to the basic fundamental power of myth. And I ultimately hope the film is an affirmation of the power of myth of Star Wars in our lives. Look, he went meta with that movie, and he's admitting he went meta in that movie. He challenged people's expectations in a Star Wars movie, right, to get us thinking about having our expectations challenged in a Star Wars movie. That extends to its controversial depiction of Luke Skywalker as a hermit who closed himself off from the Force, having sensed darkness in his new nephew Ben Solo and accidentally pushed him further towards the dark side as Kylo Ren. But as much as Luke begins the film in a very different place than when we left him at the end of the original trilogy, his arc over the course of The Last Jedi, ending with his death and the birth of a new Skywalker legend, sees him become the galactic symbol of hope and rebellion once more. The final stages of the movie, to me, are not a deconstructing the myth of Luke Skywalker. They're building on it, and they're him embracing it, the director explains. They're him absolutely defying the notion of throw away the past and embracing what actually matters about his myth and what's going to transpire in the next generation. So for me, the process of stripping away is always in the interest of getting to something essential that really matters. Something essential that really matters. He could be describing The Last Jedi himself. Johnson also made it clear that he hasn't forgotten about his set of original Star Wars movies, and he still has a burning desire to return to a galaxy far, far away down the line. He said, "I've stayed close to Kathleen Kennedy, and we get together often to talk about it," he tells Empire of his long-awaited Star Wars series. "It's just at this point a matter of schedule and when it can happen. It would break my heart if I were finished, if I couldn't get back to that sandbox at some point. For now, he's hardworking, cooking up 2 Knives Out sequels for Netflix, the first of which, Glass Onion, is arriving this December. Meanwhile, the Star Wars slate is looking similarly busy. Andor is weeks away from debuting, The Return of the Mandalorian coming early next year, and Ahsoka is to follow." Now, Johnson's comments track what Kathleen Kennedy told Empire at Star Wars Celebration earlier in the year, that everyone involved has a full plate right now, but the films are by no means dead and buried. Now, everybody's so busy, genuinely busy, and working on things. Kennedy said a few months ago, Rian had such a gigantic success with Knives Out that he's very committed to try to get that done. So it'll be a while. We have to work 3 to 5 years in advance on what we're doing. So that's where that sits. But we love him. There's a spark of hope then. And if The Last Jedi taught us anything, it's that all it took was a spark to light the fire to burn the First Order down. We're more than willing to wait for a fresh batch of Rian Johnson Star Wars stories to ignite. And again, as we get more details from this article, I'll be certain to share that with you here on the show. And to the part of the article that sort of zeroed in on what a lot of the fans' complaints were about that movie, being The Last Jedi. You have sort of the smaller, nitpicky stuff. Christian Harloff complains about this on his show, on The Big Thing, on Sith Council. He doesn't like the humor in the movie. And I'll be honest with you, if I was going to nitpick one thing about the film, the opening sequence is one of my favorite from any Star Wars movie. I think that opening battle is fantastic. Even I would probably chop out the General Hugs joke. Even that, for me, the first time it came out, I was like, eh. But again, you take that and then you go back to like the prequels and you look at what George Lucas did with his dad jokes and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Oh, this is such a drag. I'm quite beside myself. I mean, look, those lines from Rian Johnson are just as cheesy. Now, granted, if I could go back and edit out those ones from C-3PO in Attack of the Clones, I probably would. If I was sitting there next to George Lucas when he was editing, I'd probably be like, you know what, George? I know it's for kids, but why don't you get rid of those? Probably would have given the same advice to Rian Johnson. So it's not like Star Wars is not without its fair share of hokey dad jokes. The other complaint, of course, that you get is the treatment of Luke Skywalker. And I'll just wrap up the show this week on my little rant. For me personally, about why that doesn't bother me. And I haven't done it in a while. It doesn't bother me because we had our time with the original trilogy characters in those first 3 films. I got my Luke Skywalker. I got my Luke Skywalker being a Jedi at the end of Return of the Jedi. You know, and even now we got our Luke Skywalker being more of a Jedi in that final episode of Season 2 of The Mandalorian. But even before that, when I went in to the first prequel trilogy movie, being The Force Awakens, I didn't have any rampant need or desire to see Han Solo back on the big screen again. For me personally, I love Solo and I love Alden Ehrenreich's take on it. But again, seeing Harrison Ford playing Han Solo was not a necessity to me. So for me, that was never an issue. I love the way that he portrayed, Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. I think a part of that portrayal that Rian Johnson gets unfair criticism from is because of the setup that we got in The Force Awakens, meaning we didn't see Luke until the very end of the film. He's sort of dominant over all of The Force Awakens, but then you only get him in that final shot. So it was really up to Rian Johnson to bring Luke Skywalker home for those hardcore Luke Skywalker fans, and he did. He subverted expectations, but you can also go back and blame George Lucas for that, because he's the one that originally had the idea to make Mark Hamill and Luke Skywalker a hermit if he were to have gone and done the prequel trilogy. So I hope that Disney signs off on Rian Johnson doing his trilogy sooner than later. I'm actually a little bit excited for Damon Lindelof as well. I'm not the biggest fan of his. I like things that he's done. I think he kind of suffers from the same thing that J.J. Abrams suffers from. And the biggest complaint that people have about J.J. Abrams, especially on a project like Lost, is that he doesn't know how to kind of close the deal. And that certainly is a criticism that he received for The Rise of Skywalker, which, of course, I love. But no, Damon Lindelof, to me, would be a really, really good person to guide a post-The Rise of Skywalker film, especially with his close connection to JJ. There's a lot of interesting threads in The Rise of Skywalker that I'm still convinced that they can pull on. You know, I understand Disney and Lucasfilm's desire to move away from the Skywalkers, but I still firmly believe that a solid, episodes 10, 11, and 12 could really do well. It's all about the storytelling. And there's plenty of individuals out there ready to tell Star Wars stories, and I think there are still stories to tell that connect back to the Skywalker legend that can involve those legacy players, even if John Boyega says he's not coming back to Star Wars. I want to see Daisy Ridley back as Rey. What do you think? TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or if you happen to be listening on YouTube, you can leave a comment there. Before I let you go, if this is one of your first times listening to the show, I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for listening, despite the they're working on the street outside. They've been working on repaving our streets now for almost a month, I think, and they're getting close to the paving phase, and they've got a roller out there that's flattening the roads and shaking the house and knocking over my Star Wars action figures in my display case because he's shaking the ground. Anyway, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you're new, I am an author. I've written a 7-book science fiction series that I hope, if you love Star Wars and you read, you obviously love Star Wars, but if you're a reader, or you have a friend or a family member who likes sci-fi, I hope you'll take a moment, support my nerd world, and head on over to either mynerdworld.net or just go to amazon.com and check out the EMBARK science fiction space opera series. It's written for adults, much like Star Wars, right? Kind of taking a cue from George Lucas. My books are very much written for adults, but they are perfect for ages 11 and older, much along a similar vein. Adult themes, but you're not going to get the language, you're not going to get the gore, you're not going to get the over-the-top violence, you're not going to get the explicit scenes. I've had 11-year-olds read them and love them. I've had people in their 70s and 80s read them and like them as well. Book 1 is available in ebook right now for just 99 cents. You can also pick up the first trilogy, which completes a story arc. Book 1, Treasure in Darkness. Book 2, and the Vanishing War. Book 3. You can pick up that trilogy box set in ebook on Amazon.com as well for a discounted price than if you were to purchase all 3 of the first books in the series separately. They're also available in hardcover, paperback, and audiobook. Follow a ragtag squadron of pilots and one reluctant hero on a journey through the far reaches of space as they fight for their future among the stars. When Taft Guardia wasn't making upgrades to his ship, he was trying to impress fellow pilot Keitha Morrow. He'll get more than he bargained for when Keitha needs help investigating a cryptic message from her late aerospace engineer father, leading them to a shocking discovery. They soon learn that an industrial accident has set off a global catastrophe, and Taft realizes what Keitha's father left behind might be their key to survival. Amid the growing chaos, a corporate megalomaniac with an armada of starships at his disposal will stop at nothing to obtain what they found. Now Taft, unable to escape his destiny, will face a dire choice: protect the power in his possession or risk everything to save the one who matters most. If you like your science fiction space opera epic filled with romance and action, EMBARK is perfect for you. Again, on Amazon.com, search for Jon, Jon Justice, or mynerdworld.net. If you want to follow me on social media, you can find me on Instagram at the Jon Justice. I'm also on TikTok at the Jon Justice. You can also follow me on Facebook, Jon, Jon Justice. My Nerd World is also on Facebook. And I got a couple different accounts on Twitter, at Jon, Jon Justice on Twitter, and at the My Nerd World on Twitter as well. Thank you so much for checking out the show this week. I hope you enjoy your long holiday weekend. Unless you're overseas, I just hope you enjoy your weekend. And we'll talk to you again next latest news. I also hope wherever you are happy, you are healthy, and you're safe. We'll talk to you again next week. And again, thank you so much for checking out the show this week. I really do appreciate it.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.